Good afternoon, everyone. Topic here today is going to be crisis intervention training, mental health awareness training, crisis intervention mitigation. So what is the purpose of CIT for EMS? Is it to fill in when the police cannot arrive? Is it to turn our multi-hat wearing medics into FBI hostage negotiators? Obviously not. It's just a simple map to staying out of trouble, avoiding problems, and to mind the personal safety of the crew. We're going to talk about 10 patient populations that could have moments of crisis and the 4 most likely personality types that those 10 patient populations could become. Over the next hour or so, we'll talk about 40 patient populations, discuss the reutilization of what is called the OODA loop and how it pertains to conversation. We'll also talk about how 15 seconds of our professional life taken out of context can cost us our careers. And as a bonus, I'm going to try a little mind reading trick over the computer. I've never done that before, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, here we go. So 3 years ago, when I was new to the fire academy, actually before my appointment to the position, the academy chief approached me and asked if I could look into crisis intervention training from our police department for our members. CIT is a 40-hour course, and the chief wanted the entire department trained on how to de-escalate a situation before it got out of hand. I looked into the logistical aspects for this to occur and determined it would be a training nightmare to send all 3 suppression shifts, all 4 EMS platoons, and both dispatch centers, over 700 members total, to the training while on duty and off duty, and the time and length it would take to accomplish the overall goal of the mission with the overtime cost associated with it. When I presented my findings to the chief, the look I got was of defeat. He asked me to look for other ways to get this thing done, so I did. I looked at what is called DT for EMS, which is defensive tactics for EMS. I looked at EVE, which is escape violent encounters, and others. When I presented the DT4 EMS and EVE to the academy chief, the chief of the fire department and our medical director collectively stated that we are a hands-off department. We will not teach self-defense to our members because it is not our mission. Our mission is to help, to mitigate, to assist, not to engage in physical altercations with the general public. So I went looking on the good old reliable internet to see what I could find, and I found nothing, almost nothing anyways. In August of 2018, after giving the training department-wide, I accidentally found a document called Mitigation of Occupational Violence to Firefighters and EMS Responders. It was published in June of 2017. While I was looking to buy a coffee cup from the IAFF website. Page 33 of that document is very interesting because it talks about this exact presentation. Everyone that I looked to, our PD liaison for CIT, other surrounding departments, either wanted monies or were willing to give a 8 to 24-hour abridged version of CIT for cost, which there were no monies to spend. So since money was an issue, I made it a non-issue by creating what did not exist at the time, customized CIT, hands-off free training for our department. And I'll now share the shortened 1-hour version with you. So there needs to be a change in our mindset when it comes to specific population of patients. I don't disagree that it's going to be challenging and difficult to get past our own preconceived notions about people in crisis, but it is paramount to succeeding professionally and personally. Without strategy, change is merely substitution and not evolution. All calls have the potential for becoming more than what they are. Just because a call comes out as a sick case does not mean that the potential for it to be crisis-oriented does not exist. Remain open-minded to the various extremes of patients' emotions. The call for a person experiencing shortness of breath could have a cause of emotional turmoil and should be handled accordingly. Not how the call came out, but how the patient presents. Making an accurate patient assessment with eyes on is paramount to positive patient outcomes. This is a small list of possible persons who could be in crisis. We discuss the stigma of violence surrounding schizophrenia. We discuss patients and our own culture when we discuss depression and suicide. We discuss homelessness from a standpoint of families, children, abuse, marginalized persons, and chronic medical issues. We discuss the many forms of dementia and offer insight as to why people with dementia act as they do. In Youth in Need, we discuss violence, homelessness, and exploitation of children, and it has spawned a separate program that we're currently developing called The Role of the Fire Service in Youth Violence Prevention. We discuss the challenges of the autism spectrum. In traumatic brain injury, we cover both traumatic and non-traumatic TBIs, also military, veterans, and misdiagnoses. We discuss our unnecessary predispositions to those who overdose, as well as personal safety during those encounters. We discuss the proper way to interact with a person that has sustained a sudden loss. And the subject matter of persons with intellectual disabilities got me to attend a training class called First Responder Disability Awareness Training from Niagara University. We currently teach that class to our members, and it is also incorporated into this CIT training that we do with permission. With these 10 categories, it needs to be remembered that what we sometimes see as a failure to behave properly is actually a failure to communicate properly. Effective communication is key when interacting with any person in crisis. When one of the 10 patient populations are in crisis, these 4 categories of anger are where they may end up. And we'll discuss and use examples from each. Instrumental aggression. This patient believes he can get anything he wants by threat of violence. This aggression can be handled by using specific counter offers. This behavior is purposeful and can occur without provocation to obtain a specific outcome, similar to the manipulation of another person to achieve a goal. However, this is also no different than a 2-year-old throwing a temper tantrum for not getting his or her way. Breaking it down like that, one can see how redirection is key to resolving the behavior. But as with dealing with a 2-year-old child, an open-handed approach is needed. Listening will most likely be required, but as a parent, we are not to be manipulated by the child, no matter how much we love them. Fear-driven aggression. A wounded animal is more likely to attack if backed into a corner, even if not threatened. De-escalation will consist of matching the patient's pace until he or she focuses on what is being said rather than the fear. Decreasing your patient's pace will calm the patient down. I want you to think of a time in your life when you were so angry that you were literally unable to hear the persons around you talking to you, trying to calm you down. That is where this person is. What did it take to calm you down? When could you begin to hear the voices calming you down? Time and space are what is needed here. Justifiable anger. Validating feelings is key to a breakthrough with this person. Fogging is used as an offering of agreement and validation of the anger is a common ground. Fogging and the broken record technique are most helpful. We'll do an example. You're dispatched to a call for a person with a laceration to the arm. Upon arrival, you and your partner notice 2 police cars in the driveway. You enter the house and it is in complete disarray. Broken mirrors and kitchen items, broken picture frames and holes in the wall. You see your patient sitting in the living room in handcuffs with a towel on his right forearm. Your partner asks if the patient is under arrest. The officer states no, just protective custody. You ask if the cuffs can come off so you can assess the laceration. The officer talks to the patient momentarily and then removes the cuffs. The patient appears to have been crying, and you're cautious while removing the towel not to make the cut start bleeding again. Your partner leaves you with the trauma bag and says that he's going to go out and grab the tablet for the report. You assess the cut as needing stitches and advise the patient so. To which there is no response. He appears indifferent. You start to dress the wound. The patient is still silent, so you decide to engage him in conversation. What happened tonight? You ask in a generous, friendly tone. He says, my wife of 15 years left me for my best friend in high school. So how can we relate with this person? What do we know about this situation that we can connect with him about? Is there anyone here that can relate to exactly how this person is feeling? Probably not, hopefully not. However, I'm going to guess that some people might be using married for 15 years and my wife left me for my best friend in high school as a reason for not being able to hear what the patient is feeling. Everyone here can relate to emotions that the patient is experiencing, and this is how. Have you ever been cheated? Not cheated on, but cheated, slighted. I think all of us have. Ever been humiliated? I know I have. These are the two feelings that he is experiencing: cheated and humiliated. We can all relate to this. Therefore, we can relate to him. But why do we want to relate to him? We want to relate to him so that we will not become a secondary target for his aggression. We are diffusing a bomb before it goes off. Remember that what we sometimes see as a failure to behave properly is actually a failure to communicate properly. Give persons in crisis the time and space and ability to communicate rather than to act out. Angry at the world. This patient will make unrealistic and erratic demands and use these as an excuse to attack when the demands are not met. Do not react in a startled or defensive way, for this is the response that is being looked for. Use emotionless responses. De-escalation involves giving the patient positive choices rather than violence to get what he wants. These patients are the most dangerous to contend with, and your safety shall supersede all else when in contact with this type of patient. Unfortunately, many of these patients will test the limits by doing just the opposite of what you ask, and will most likely result in the use of chemical and physical restraints. With that said, remember that restraining someone both physically and chemically should always be a last resort. Some common signs of agitation. Knowing the signs and symptoms of a medical illness for differential diagnosis is the same as seeing the physical signs of agitation to avoid conflict. Just as we would not want to have a patient that is so short of breath that she can only speak in 2 or 3 word sentences, answer questions before we have stabilized her, we do not want to ramp up an autistic by not paying attention to the physical outward signs being demonstrated by that individual, indicating that the patient encounter will become problematic. A person may quickly move from slightly agitated to full-scale aggression. Attention to key is detail. Accurate patient assessments are paramount to positive patient outcomes. We should come from a reasonable position with logic and abstract thought when dealing with a person in crisis. A person in crisis may be illogical, concrete in thought, or unfocused. Once it is established where the patient is mentally or emotionally, we will be better suited to interact with that patient. So let's talk about how it can go wrong. How as medics, we can sometimes be lazy. And when our super duper egos kick in, it can all go wrong. We all know or knew someone with these traits, a medic that brings in the truly minimal amount of equipment is necessary. It works like this. Firefighters on scene for a reported cardiac event. The medic tells his EMT to grab the monitor. As they proceed to the second floor of the house, the medic spies that the patient is obviously having a cardiac event secondary to the diaphoresis, chest rubbing, and general malaise of the patient. This patient is obviously having a right-sided MI, he thinks to himself. Firefighter finishes with a blood pressure and says to the medic, 140/90. The medic appears confused, tells the firefighter to give him the cuff, and he takes the pressure on the other arm. He tells his EMT to get the guy on the monitor. While this is occurring, firefighters are just standing around, as is the family. The medic gets a pressure of 140/90. He turns to the EMT. The monitor shows sinus rhythm at a rate of 90. He then turns to the patient and asks if he is having chest pain. The patient, diaphoretic with drool sliding out of his mouth, now mutters something unintelligible. The medic then diagnoses the patient as a diabetic, and since he keeps the glucometer in the cardiac monitor, quickly assesses a blood glucose of 32 milligrams per deciliter. He then turns to the firefighters and in a nice authoritarian way says, "Go get my bags." What message does that send to the family and even firefighters? Unprepared, unprofessional, unempathetic, or is it as simple as I don't care? Second floor cardiac arrest should have all bags brought in, including the stair chair. Listening to the firefighters, talking to the patient or the family for history, asking instead of ordering, all completely avoidable. But it starts with our mentality, our ability to be open to others. Because when you're bringing in the bags, you bring in the supportive care, the compassion, the correct attitude, and the brain, and by proxy, the active learning. Fear is a huge motivator for most people. And for a person in crisis, that fear can be a barrier to us. When fear-based knee-jerk reactions occur, miscommunications, mistrust, and misgivings begin. If you believe there is no common ground between you and your patient, you should create common ground. Let the patient rant if necessary. Use the tools you have to build the trust in the patient, because without trust, nothing positive will occur. Recognize if the patient is in crisis or not. Identify the crisis and have a plan to intervene appropriately. Properly approach the individual to mitigate the crisis. Interact with the person to become aware of what the problem is. Respond to the person in crisis in a positive way. The RIAIR approach is taken from the First Responder Disability Training class and is incorporated into our CIT training. Positive patient outcome means that we held to the first rule of medicine, which is do no harm, don't make it worse. Verbal de-escalation is basically using calm language, tone, affect, posture, hand placement, consideration, and patience to defuse, redirect, or de-escalate a crisis situation. A patient in crisis is like a bomb waiting to go off. Once a bomb has exploded, there's nothing to defuse. The idea is to mitigate. Listen to what is being said and what is not being said. Not going off on tangents, not getting bogged down, not losing sight of the goal, which is definitive care, which we are not. We are only a facilitator to definitive care. A person in crisis requires a professional in crisis counseling, or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, to which we are not, even though many of us like to think that we are. Be mindful of on-scene time, which goes to the second rule of medicine. Treat the disease. In this case, the treatment consists of listening and getting the patient to definitive care. So, do face masks hide our facial expressions? The short answer is yes. But a person's eyes can say a lot about them, as can crow's feet. Example, if in conversation with a person in crisis, the individual smiles or laughs, how do you know if the smile is genuine or the laugh is genuine? Crow's feet will wrinkle up on a genuine laugh or smile, not necessarily on a forced smile. Also, body posture, tone of voice, physical mannerisms can clue you into the patient's demeanor. Other things to consider are requesting clarification of statements made by the patient, looking at body language and statements as a whole, consideration of what is being said in context, and being aware that signals can be misread. Why is this important? Safety, honesty. There's a good article in the U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health, published online on September 25 of 2020, called "Wearing Face Masks Strongly Confuses Counterparts in Reading Emotions." It's a good read if anyone is interested in it. Allow yourself the opportunity to get as much information as you need about the patient to make informed decisions. Allow yourself the time to assess whether the situation is potentially dangerous to you. Allow yourself the time to assess whether the person is rational. Recognize no-win situations and immediately leave if needed. Yes, leave. Think about all the schooling that we receive and how many times we are taught to check the scene for safety. Like National Registry, for instance. Everyone knows the routine: scene safe, PSI, how many patients do I have all the necessary equipment. But never are we asked to continuously reassess the scene for safety. We learn to keep our heads on a swivel during certain incidents, but even then, we do not always do a good job of walking away. By the way, walking away from a patient that has become violent is not considered by our department as abandonment. It falls back to scene safety. And if the scene becomes unsafe due to the patient's actions or statements, and our crews are unable to make the scene safe, our crews can back out and call for aid as needed. Belittling, verbal jousting your patient, it's discouraged. We are not judo linguists. Build up the patient instead. We're here to help. Like in the case of an overdose. Many times I've seen crews wake up an overdose with Narcan, only to end up in an argument or altercation. And it all starts with just one question: how much heroin did you use? In our city, the usual response consists of the following: I did not do heroin. I'm a diabetic. I was sleeping. Or a number of such variations. I'm certain that we are not unique in this. But the question is a setup for an altercation. What if the patient really didn't do heroin? Think of another opiate: morphine, Dilaudid, synthetic, natural. What does it matter? But as medics, when the overdose patient lies to us, we feel so personally insulted, like someone stuck an ice spear through our heart. And then just the browbeating begins and the needless arguments begin. Just call it what it is: unconscious, unresponsive, pinpoint pupils, Narcan wins again. Is it really important what was taken? We need to get out of our own way. Once the patient is revived, be factual. Say something like, hey, I don't know what you took, but it almost killed you. Would you like to go and help for this? Notwithstanding, be mindful when giving Narcan. The goal should be to increase respiratory effort, not completely wake up your patient. In our city, we still have people that mix opiates with other substances, such as PCP, meth, cocaine, or other pills of unknown quantity, quality, or capacity. So make it all a non-issue. Give enough to restore respiratory drive and not bring out the PCP, because I personally do not like playing with PCP guy. Not only as medics are we supposed to be providing care, but empathizing with the patient. It makes us better at our job overall. And at the end of the day, doesn't the person in crisis just want to be okay, safe, even for those 15, 30 minutes that we interact with them? Is a person in crisis actually in crisis? Is the autistic having a manic episode, or is the behavior correct for the current situation? Only one person should be speaking with the patient. There is no tag team happening here. It may confuse the patient, escalate the situation by accident. The more a person loses control mentally or physically, the less likely they're going to hear what you say. Keep your tone of voice, inflection, and body language neutral. Be mindful of your facial expressions and movements. With that being said, if you realize early on that your encounter will not be sealed without the use of some type of chemical restraint or physical restraint, rethink the purpose and back out as necessary. Or if the moment you lay eyes on the situation, the first thought in your head is ketamine, or we're going to need more help, then act accordingly. Realize that Turning to restraints should be the last thing to do unless completely unavoidable. Every one of us should be able to go home at the end of their shift. And whether or not we think that the patient's feelings are justified or not is irrelevant, because to the patient, they are real. Identify the patient's wants and feelings. Actively listen to the patient and what he is telling you, but don't interrupt. A good example of this is a schizophrenic as having hallucinations. Many textbooks say to challenge the hallucinations. I say no, this is why, because of trust. I had a patient who was having a tactile hallucination. He stated to me that he felt like another person was on him, attached to his back. He also stated that he was schizophrenic and suffered from tactile hallucinations. Now, I did not see the person on his back, but I did not challenge the delusion either. He further told me how he can get past the hallucination. He asked if we had a scale. I said, no, we do not carry a scale on the rig. He then requested a ride to the hospital where he knew the scale was so he could weigh himself in. When I asked why he wanted to weigh himself in, he replied, I weigh between 145 and 150 pounds. If I weigh myself and I weigh in between 145 and 150 pounds, I will know that this is a hallucination and need to get back on my meds. So we drove to the hospital. I called him the report, emphasized to the nurse that the patient will need a scale right away, and explained why. When we arrived, the scale was there, and that's about where it ended. Instead of allowing the patient to weigh in and feel better, hence completing the de-escalation of the individual, the nurse stood firm on policy that the patient must change into a gown before he could weigh in. I attempted to advocate for the patient. The nurse quickly shut me down with the policy statement. The patient now began to get louder and drew the attention of security, who stood on the side of the nurse and policy. I tried again to intervene, but it was too late by then. He swung at security, and everybody knows what happens when a patient swings on security. Everything went wrong because one person, one cog in the machine of getting the patient the help he needed failed. In this case, the nurse failed to do proper patient assessment, looked at the patient with blinders on, and remained rigid and unwavering concerning policy. However, learning did occur on behalf of the ER that night. Subsequent encounters with the patient did result in him being able to weigh in before changing into a gown. So it was not a complete loss. It was just a very hard lesson learned. Personal space is defined as a 3-foot bubble in which a person feels safe. Respect the patient's decisions not to allow you into their personal space. Do not question the reason or motive. If you do not need to get into someone's personal space, use the approach that we were all taught when handling children, work distal to proximal. In this case, it not only translates to physically getting down to the patient's level, but also slowly getting into the patient's bubble. Also reassess the scene at all times, making sure that the patient is not encroaching into your bubble as well. Empathy is more important than sympathy, and any attempt to mask sincerity can lead to the patient not trusting you. We cannot control the patient's behavior, but we can control our response. Controlling our response will have a direct effect on whether the situation escalates or diffuses. So, what do you call overacting to sell your empathy? It's going to destroy the trust being built during the interaction with the patient. She will be mentally shut down, usually resulting in unnecessary physical confrontations. So what do you call overselling to sell your empathy? Being condescending. So you're called out for a baby with a fever. You arrive at the apartment complex. You go up to the 3rd floor, knock on the door. Mom opens the door with the baby in her arms. Baby's about 5 to 6 months old, crying, unhappy. The conversation begins. What's going on? Mom says the baby has a temperature of 109. 109, you respond. Obviously, this child does not have a temperature of 109. You think to yourself, if she did, she'd be bursting into flames. So you ask to hold the child. The baby does not feel hot, maybe a little bit warm, but not hot. A slight sick breath, but no fire. No malaise, nor acting inappropriate for a child with fever. You ask mom for the thermometer to see the reading for yourself, and the thermometer reads 109. So let's stop the scenario right there real quick. Right now, there's an opportunity for the medic to either use this as a teaching point for mom or to become an agitator. The teaching point is that mom is correct and the temperature is 109 because and means point. So the conversation should then be followed up with, okay, have you given the baby Tylenol or Motrin to break the fever? No? Okay. What hospital would you like to go to? Make it a non-issue. There is no need to berate mom for what we did not know. Keep the patient grounded by remaining on track with the issue at hand or the initial conversation. The patient may ask unanswerable questions or questions with negative outcomes. Redirect the patient at that point. And if you do not know the answer, do not lie or make something up. Just simply state no, no, especially a legal question. If the patient chooses to challenge your authority, redirect their attention to the issue at hand. Ignore the question, but not the patient. Stay away from tangent conversations. Bring them back to focus on how you can both work together to solve the problem. The behavioral change stairway model is from the FBI, and even though it is a policing agency, the stairway model works well for us as well for behavioral modification, which once behavior is modified from aggression or possible aggression to non-aggression, continued assessment and treatment of that patient can occur. So this is the continuum of force pyramid. And this is specifically where EMS and law enforcement differ when it comes to crisis intervention. First, police will, quote unquote, command a presence. From an obvious standpoint of uniform and patrol car and the like, total number of officers physically present. From an EMS standpoint, we should never command a presence. Not to mention, if we come from a humble viewpoint of we are the help and behave physically and mentally as such, we eliminate perceived threats. We ask permission to interact, verbal consent. Empty hand controls are commands made by an officer, some of which are usually followed by the simple comply or else. Also in this section is the use of pain compliance by an officer if needed. From the EMS standpoint, we cannot engage the patient in this way. We need to understand that the patient and to help the patient understand that we are only here for assistance. We do not command. We do not tell our patient to comply, nor do we use pain compliance techniques because that breaks rule number 1 of medicine. For us, having to go past the point of verbal communication to resolve an emotional or psychological crisis is not an option. Reinforce the need for positive options, never pick sides. Offer concise, respectful choices. Offer positive choices for conflict resolution first. Do not box the patient in with limited negative assessments of the situation. Impact weapons and chemical agents are not possessed by EMS, thankfully. We should always avoid getting to the point where this is needed. The thought process should be from a standpoint of a patient advocate, not patient control. Remember, the behavior is a form of communication, a sign that there's turmoil in the person. The use of physical and chemical restraints should be a last resort option. The use of deadly force is not an option for our profession. Police follow this pyramid as a result of a person's behavior or compliance or attitude or demeanor. Our objectives are simple. Allow the police to do their job. However, let us assume the mentality of not letting the patient encounter get to the point where police presence is required. Mindful that if police presence is required, then we must step back to a different role of support for both the patient and the officer involved. Not to dictate what should occur, but to ensure patient and officer safety. If you offer the patient limited but positive and flexibility, you may be able to avoid unnecessary altercations. Let the patient finish smoking before getting in the truck. What's the big deal? Just as we never turn our back on a suicidal patient, we should never allow the patient between us and the point of egress. We should also never have the patient feel boxed in either. At the same time, the relationship between patient and medic needs to be understood. We are here to help. We are not a punching bag. And worst case scenario, if the scene becomes unsafe and you cannot make it safe, get in the truck, leave, call for assistance. Not all silence is golden. An idle mind could be hatching a devastating plan. Watch the facial quirks and smirks for no reason or a glare. Silence can be a powerful communication tool. Allow time for the patient to either digest the conversation or to have a moment of introspection. Do not speak until spoken to in this instance. It shows respect and equality, but do not allow the patient to remain silent. Repeat the question to regain train of thought, because if no communication is occurring, you will never know what the patient is thinking. And even though some of us may have never experienced a point in time in our life where we thought that the world and society had turned on us, it does not mean that we cannot understand the situation. Remember, if you can't wrap your head around it, it's not a bad thing. It means it's just not you. I want you to take this time to think about how unfair our job can be at times. Let me take you guys back to before EMT school. Your interview for EMT school, for those of us that had to interview for EMT school. If you were told the following, would you ever get into EMS to begin with? So your job description is as follows. You will have a 15-minute window of opportunity in another person's life whom you do not know anything about, who is sick or injured or in a mental or emotional crisis of sorts, and you'll have to get a diagnosis, a treatment, and or a mental health plan, absolutely correct, 100% of the time, no matter what, or the person could attack you, hurt themselves, others, or could ultimately die. Would you still want to be in this profession? Would you still want to go on to EMT school? So it's a question that you can ask yourself. So this is the OODA loop. This was developed by Colonel John Boyd during the Korean conflict. And it's to observe, orientate, decide, act, and then repeat. So if you don't have one, please pull out a pen or pencil and something to write on, paper, because now I'm going to do or attempt to do the mind reading trick. And there's a very good rationale for this. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Question number 1, I want you to write down a country that starts with the letter D, David. Country that starts with the letter D, David. Now I would like for you to write down the name of an animal that starts with the letter E, Echo. Animal that starts with the letter E, Echo. And then I would like for you to write down a color that starts with the letter P, Peepaw, a color that starts with the letter P. All right. So through the power of Zoom and the fact that, of course, I'm a paramedic, I can read anybody's mind. Let's see what kind of answers we can come up with here. I'm getting a lot of Denmark. I'm getting Dominican Republic. For those persons, if anyone wrote down Dubai, that is a city, that is not a country. Detroit does not count. Deutschland does not count because we're speaking in English. And DPRK is actually North Korea, so that does not necessarily count either. As far as animals that start with the letter E, I'm getting big ones, so I'm getting an elephant. I'm getting an emu, it's a small animal. I'm also getting eagle for the Patriots. I'm getting elk. I got an egret, I think. And did anybody write down eel? A lot of people don't think of eel when we say animal because they think of a fish. As far as colors that start with the letter P, I'm getting pink, purple. I'm getting some pale, excuse me, pale from our profession. There's also plum and peach. And if anyone out there has kids around ages 4 to 6, I think I've got at least 1 or 2 periwinkles. Now, what's the point of this? The point is that if I know or have a good idea of what the answers to the questions I ask are going to be, I will know what treatment road we're going to go down. If I know what road we're going to go down, then I will be able to see conflict coming and can avoid it. I am steering the conversation and the patient in the direction I want it to go in, but allowing for the person in crisis to vent, rant, or explain, all within the bounds of maintaining a safe scene. Doing so will enable for the behavior of the patient to be self-modified and allow for the treatment to begin. Again, second rule in medicine, to treat the disease. Being in control of this OODA loop at all times will give you an edge over a person in crisis. By doing so, you're going to be engaging one step away from potential harm, never having to use de-escalation techniques because we have not allowed for this situation to de-escalate to begin with. When using this approach, there will be a reaction or change in circumstances, and the loop will have to begin again. If the correct information is not gathered in a quick and timely fashion, the situation can deteriorate. And remember that doing nothing in turn is actually doing something to the patient, whether good or bad. And just as there is no one finite way to contend with an agitated patient, there is no one finite way to deal with a patient having a cardiac arrest, a cardiac event. Each is different and requires a modification of care, but the basics are the same. Aspirin, nitro, 12 lead, 10 minutes or less on scene for a heart attack. And with an individual in crisis, do not allow it to escalate. Realize no-win situations. Respect space. Become a non-target. Because this is our goal. Do no harm. If we're in a position that requires immediate police assistance, then we should review our ability to make decisions. If the thought process on our part is above reproach and require immediate police assistance, then we should review our actions. If the actions on our part are correct and we still require immediate police assistance, then we should react accordingly. If we as providers are beyond reproach with our patient care, assessment, and situational awareness, then we have acted in accordance with the patient's best interest in mind. Notwithstanding the reality that sometimes a person cannot be approached or reasoned with without the need for police assistance. Our goal should always be one of giving the person every opportunity to avoid police presence. The reason I say this is because it has been my experience that when police arrive on scene, patient becomes even more so agitated, and then we start down a very slippery slope, which usually includes negative patient outcomes. The very first fire chief I ever worked for, a guy by the name of William Madrosic Sr., he's retired, said one of the smartest things I've ever heard concerning this job. He said that the general public does not know or care if you're a career or volunteer firefighter, because when the alarm sounds, you have a job to do, and when you get off the truck, you're expected to be the professional, so act accordingly. And the general public does not know and does not care if you're a volunteer or career firefighter. There is an expectation of performance and professionalism. Same as last day or first day, last call or first call. We must do our best to remember this because it is not about us. So, will my response meet the needs of the patient? I hope that they do. Situational and environmental awareness, got to keep that head on a swivel. Will my responses maintain my safety? They should, and at a minimum, they should not make it worse. And be mindful of the bigger picture because we are not definitive care. Not only that, but we're not psychotherapists either. And at the end of the day, the schizophrenic will continue to be a schizophrenic. The autistic will continue to be autistic. And for the limited time that we have with the patient, do not make it worse. Everyone that we come in contact with is an individual. A lot of times we have a tendency to group people together. Those who overdose, those who are schizophrenic. There is a person inside that schizophrenic, autistic youth. We need to always be mindful of that. If the situation has gotten to the point where police assistance is needed, do realize that you are probably being recorded by a device. Please don't ever forget that. Protocols. Definition of a patient. QI, QA specific to the mission statement. General patient assessment. Protocol for behavioral psychiatric. Protocol for altered mental status. Protocol for ketamine or other medication for chemical restraint. Procedure for use of physical restraints. Procedures for stretcher use. Those specific protocols right there can help guide and keep our people out of unnecessary harm or trouble. Cell phones, body cams, dash cams, medic units, street cameras, Big Brother's watching, and 15 seconds of our professional life taken out of context can cost us our career because it's never the entire clip that makes it to social media. Just the little piece that that individual wants everybody else to see. I agree it's not fair, but that's the way it is. So please always be mindful. And at the end of the day, in the fire service, we have almost every and any resource available to us. We need to know and use them wisely. I can tell you from the photo that you're looking at that the gentleman there without the shirt on was having a very bad day. And just out of view of the photo was our heavy rescue squad. So even had the gentleman fell, luckily enough, he would have only fallen about 7 or 8 feet, and there was a couple of guys down there that were ready to catch him. But this is what we do, and this is who we are. We spend and we spare no expense and spend every expense just for one. And it's easy to do it on a rescue like this because it's seeable, as opposed to a person who may be having a emotional or mental crisis or just somebody that's not having a good day. So, learning can be revolutionary. However, revolution by definition comes back on itself because of unresolved issues that need to be addressed until the issue no longer exists. Therefore, when the revolutionary learning ends, evolution may begin. Thank you for your time. I hope this was knowledge shared today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. We have a couple of questions that have come in that if you wouldn't mind going over. If anyone has any more questions, comments, experiences, techniques, anything, please go ahead and submit them. We have a few minutes till the end of the hour that we can discuss all of those. But our first question is real quick. Could you just reiterate the name of the document that you referenced at the beginning that you said you found some really interesting stuff on page 33? I think it was kind of the basis for getting into some of this training.
Right. So I actually found that after I did the training. The document is called Mitigation of Occupational Violence to Firefighters and EMS Responders. It was put out by FEMA, I believe the National Fire Academy as well.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and I'll get in touch with you after this presentation, and I'll put a link to that article or paper, that document in the follow-up email. So everyone in attendance right now, you'll receive that sent right to your email. And also I sent a link in the chat to one of the documents that was referenced during the presentation. I'll be sure to send that link out with all this follow-up information as well. We also have another question. So could you talk a little bit more about, is this training required? How do you structure the training within your department, if it is required or encouraged, and a little bit more about actually implementing this training as an effective tool?
Well, I got the directive from my chief. That's how we did it. And I just had to go out there and look. I would advise, just because I really struggled with it, don't reinvent the wheel. This is my email up here. If anyone that is interested, I can send like a rough outline of things that you want to do, but this has to be a very specific program cared towards your department. Things that work in, a city like St. Louis are not going to work for a rural community. So everything has to be very much so tailored. Everything from your, if you're running ALS or BLS trucks, it really doesn't matter because this is a very basic thing to do. So if anybody wants more information on that, you can contact me. I'll send you everything that I have so you guys can do this. As far as it being mandatory, in our state, Missouri, right now, I believe the state legislature passed a law requiring CIT for paramedics and EMTs. Right now, we are doing our own thing. The state level is still pretty young. I did kind of get the okay from some state folks to go ahead and continue doing our presentation that we do here in the city of St. Louis. The actual presentation is more so personal, interactive, and it's about a 6 to 8 hour course.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll be sure to include, along with all the links to everything that I'm referencing, I'll include your contact information in the follow-up email. So if anyone has any questions about the program or about maybe like moving forward with, if you want to implement some of these things in your own practice, that information will be right there. You guys can start a dialogue after this presentation. If anyone has any last minute questions, comments, we have one comment that I just want to go ahead and reinforce, that we had some people submitting that dealing with patients having mental crisis indeed does need a lot of professional ethics. So there is definitely a need that's being acknowledged by people that there's a level of professionalism that you need to maintain along with people that they're going through stuff. There's a lot of things that they are dealing with. So it's very important to recognize that and to act accordingly.
Yeah, it's it can be easy for us as medics to not play well when it comes to a person having a manic episode, for example. It's easy for us to just kind of push that off to the side. Oh, she's just going to the psych ward in the ER, and she'll be out, and we'll see her again later. It's very easy to fall into that trap. It is very hard for us to remember that everyone is individual. I'm no exception to this rule. But if we push that conversation, which hopefully this presentation will, we start opening up some more eyes, we start opening up some more hearts, and then we can take those new medics and EMTs that are coming into our profession, and instead of allowing them to continue to make the same mistakes we have made, allow them to make different mistakes, allow them to learn how, hey, this really isn't such a good idea to berate or belittle an overdose patient. I mean, do you not think that a heroin addict knows that they're a heroin addict? Do they need to be reminded that they're a heroin addict? No. Instead, why don't you say, like, hey, why don't we, have you thought about getting help for this? Why don't we try and find some way for you to be better?
I think that's a wonderful sentiment to end on. So I do have a question that I will be sure to, George, your question, I'll be sure to relay that to you, directly to Christian. I'll put you guys in contact about that after this presentation. But I want to thank you so much for being here, Christian. Thank you so much for presenting this information. I think it's really timely, especially at a time when the baseline level of stress for many people is probably a lot higher than most people are accustomed to. So this is a great message to put out there. And I want to thank you so much for being here and everyone in attendance. I did put in a link in the chat that will take you to the NEMSI's website where you're able to register for CEU for today's presentation. So if you're interested in that after today's webinar concludes, the link is there and it'll also be in the follow-up email. But do you have anything you want to say before we go ahead and get going?
No, just thank you to the people who came to listen. I hope that you can take this back to your departments. And if you're not in the administrative side of this and you're in the training side of it, like I am, say, hey, boss, you might want to listen to this, or we may want to consider some of this, because the whole idea, I mean, if it's just the St. Louis Fire Department that does it, that's great. However, this, in my personal opinion, really does need to expand out more, because this is just, myself and, a small team of people that did this thing. We need more brains, we need more eyes on, we need more experience to hopefully maybe make this evolve into something better.